Eric and Eileen arrived in Marrakech on the 13th of September. They stayed in the Hotel Continental on Rue des Banques in the Medina. Eileen described it as a brothel, and she wanted to move out even though she was unwell.
At first we lived in Marrakech itself, en pension, after the first night, which we spent in a brothel owing to cook's list being out of date.
They moved to what Eileen described as the second most expensive hotel in Marrakech, which was the Majestic, later renamed the Koutoubia after the mosque in the center of the city. They stayed here for about a week. In its heyday, it looked quite a place, but time has taken its toll on the place. Then they came here to Chez Madame Valette, the guest house in Rue Edmond Dutey, and it's now renamed Rue Moulay Ismail. We believe this is the most likely building for it, and there's no surviving photographs.
Eric wrote in his Morocco diary of the 9th of October 1938, "Mendacity is so bad as to make it intolerable to walk through the streets. Poverty, without doubt, is severe. In the bazaar quarter, great numbers of people sleeping in the street, literally a family in every doorway. Large number of refugees camping outside the town. Said to be some of the people who fled north from the famine districts further south."
One of the things Eric and Eileen were obliged to do was make a deposition at the British consulate. And they did that on the 15th of September, soon after they arrived. And this enabled them to get a French identity card 2 days later. By the 18th of September, they'd identified this villa as the place where they wanted to stay and Eric to write his book Coming Up for Air. He wrote in the observatory here, and there's two very famous photographs of him writing. One, the clear photograph, and one being taken by surprise by Eileen with the camera. Sadly, there is no sight of the villa anymore. We believe it was demolished in about 2005. If I win the Euro Millions lottery, I'll have the house recreated on this patch here.
Villa Seymour. Eileen wrote to Eric's mother on the 15th and the 18th of September 1938. "I think the villa will be fun from our point of view. It's entirely isolated. There's a large sitting room, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom and a kitchen. No provision for cooking, but we'll have some little pots with charcoal in them and a primus. The country is practically desert, but may look different after the rains. And the villa has a sort of observatory on its roof, which would be good to work in." Eric was so depressed that I thought we would have to come home, but he's now quite excited about the villa, and I think we'll be happy here.
Eric and Eileen made a massive shop 2 days before they went into the villa, presumably for delivery to the villa. And I've got a copy of that shopping list. It looks like a 21st century online shopping order. The two things that struck me immediately was that they bought 18 bottles of wine and also local beer.
Eileen wrote to Eric's mother on the 15th and the 18th of September 1938. "According to Dr. Diot, who was recommended by a friend of my brother, Lawrence O'Shaughnessy, the climate is ideal for him, or will be in a few weeks' time when it's cooler. Dr. Diot hasn't really examined Eric yet, but intends to. He is not particularly sympathetic, but he must be a good doctor, and through him we are able to know that the chest really is reacting properly."
This is now the hospital Ibn Zor. It was originally the French hospital L'Hôpital Montchamp, built in 1913, and this is where Dr. Diot was working.
Extract from the essay Marrakech. "When you go through the Jewish quarters, you gather some idea of what the medieval ghettos were probably like. Under their Moorish rulers, the Jews were only allowed to own land in certain restricted areas. And after centuries of this kind of treatment, they have ceased to bother about overcrowding. Many of the streets are a good deal less than 6 feet wide. The houses are completely windowless, and the sore-eyed children cluster everywhere in unbelievable numbers, like clouds of flies. Down the center of the street, there is generally running a little river of urine."
Orwell wrote extensively in his diaries and indeed in the essay Marrakech about the Jewish quarter. He always referred to it as the Jewish quarter. not the Mellah, which everyone else would know it as. It's this small area of the city. It was walled and it had gates which were closed at night. So the Jewish community lived in this area for 7 centuries. It never expanded size-wise, but the population obviously did. Welcome to the Jinan El Hati, what Orwell referred to as the public gardens. And at that time, there was a zoo for the entire length of that pathway we've just walked. And there's photographs that Eric and Eileen took of the Barbary macaques in the zoo. And there's a female hand feeding one of the monkeys, and I suspect that's Eileen's.
Extract from the essay Marrakech. I was feeding one of the gazelles in the public gardens. Gazelles are almost the only animals that look good to eat when they are still alive. In fact, one can hardly look at their hindquarters without thinking of mint sauce.
When they weren't visiting zoos, Eric and Eileen were very keen cinema goers. We know they went to the cinema while they were in Casablanca on the way here. We know they went to the cinema in Casablanca on the way out.
Casablanca went to the pictures and saw films making it virtually certain that the French government expect war. The first, a film on the life of a soldier, and with some very good shots of the inner arrangements of the Maginot Line. The other was the Pathé News Gazette, in which the announcer gave what was practically a political speech denouncing Germany.
Welcome to Tadet and this hotel, Auberge Les Noyers, the Walnut Inn. He'd finished the first draft of Coming Up for Air, and they were going to take a week off before he began the revision, and they were going to travel up into the mountains.
Eric wrote in his Morocco diary on the 27th of January 1939, "The hotel at Tadet, exactly like a cheap Paris hotel, and ditto with 1 or 2 cafes en route. The French people who one met also, completely like lower middle class French, living exactly the same life as in France, except that they're obliged to speak a little Arabic."
We know he came here because of the letter he wrote to Geoffrey Gora. Why they chose Tadet, they had all sorts of travel guides which survive to this day. This one, Marrakech, the Atlas Mountains and the Souss. And there's Moroccan Travel News, an English language publication that was circulated at that time and also recommended places in the mountains. This is the civil cemetery for the French community and international community. It's also the main military cemetery. A number of the people Eric and Eileen knew and mentioned in their papers are buried here. So this is the last resting place of Madame Vallat. And since we came here last year, they've actually put a stone there to help us remember her, where she's laying. Which is quite a moving thing. But I'll ask Richard to say the final extract from Marrakech.
As the corpse went past, the flies left the restaurant table in a cloud and rushed after it, but they came back a few minutes later. The little crowd of mourners, all men and boys, but no women, threaded their way across the marketplace between the piles of pomegranates and the taxis and the camels, wailing a short chant over and over again. What really appeals to the flies is that the corpses here are never put in coffins. They are merely wrapped in a piece of rag and carried on a rough wooden bier on the shoulders of 4 friends.